during my briefing, they kept saying, they kept using this term spatial computer. Like they're trying to invent the next product category. That's what they want to do. They want to have some sort of hardware to push into the future. That's what this is. They just haven't convinced me that it really is the future yet.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the BetaKit Podcast. I am Douglas Altus, editor-in-chief of BetaKit, and along with my co-host, Rob Kennedy, we talk Canadian tech and tech from a Canadian perspective on this podcast. Now, sometimes that means hour-long discussions based upon month-long investigative reports on the future of collision and what it means for the Canadian tech ecosystem. Sometimes it's just, hey, Apple launched a new thing, but not just anything. It's a thing that you put on your face, and it costs $3,500. USD. We're going to get into that. So joining us to talk about this new epoch of AR, VR that we've entered in because Apple finally launched a thing, Patrick O'Rourke, editor-in-chief of Mobile Syrup, our former sister site, and he's our former friend of the podcast. We haven't had him on in a while, but he's back, and he's actually had this thing hug his face. Patrick, man, how you doing? Are you in Canada?
I'm good. I am indeed back in Canada. I like to think that I've been on the podcast this entire time, just also not talking in the background like I used to. You know, just sitting there.
Oh,
being
man.
a
It'd be cool
placeholder.
if you like leaned down. It's just like his head, then he leaned back.
That is a total throwback. Patrick would just absolve himself. Pre-video, Patrick would absolve himself from segments he didn't have anything to participate in by just absolutely sitting there. Not this week, Patrick. I'm glad you've returned from the Apple mothership because we have a lot of questions to ask you. But maybe the first place we want to start is, beyond talking about the device, beyond just talking some tech, all the ways that it connects to the metaverse, AR, VR, all that juicy, fun stuff that we like to dig into. One of the reasons why we want to have you on the podcast is not only have you had a chance to play with this device, you actually got a chance to go. You've been to various Apple events before. I'm wondering, just for people who don't get to experience that, or they just read your coverage, or maybe they watch the recap video online or things like that, what is the current experience of going to a WWDC, particularly in 2023, because you weren't necessarily in the keynote stage this year. You're kind of like outside watching a pre-recorded video. So what's all this about?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different now. They do it outside, still within Apple's spaceship campus, but it's entirely outside. They just kind of make rows of chairs. There's no Steve Jobs theater presentation, and none of the execs are actually physically there except to intro the pre-recorded presentation, which is a little weird. You make everybody travel out here, and it's just something that you could have streamed online anyways.
Which they do, which many people are watching.
100% they do. And the other thing that's probably worth noting is the fact that it's all remote. Like, some developers are invited, but it's a much smaller group, and it's entirely free now on the developer side. All of the sessions that you used to have to pay a lot of money to get into, all of that is totally free. So it's a bit of a different approach than Apple's had in years past. Yeah,
because this is, for people who are not aware, but are familiar with like Apple announcements being covered, it is very rare in all of tech or anywhere else for like a company's developer conference to be covered as a news-making event. But I think it speaks to, I don't know, the past 15 or so years of Apple having its hands on the throat of consumer tech, consumer electronics. Given, I would say in years past, because this was a in-person, like attended by everyone event, they were a little bit more restrictive with the access. What was it like this time, given the fact that, again, as you noted, they didn't necessarily have to fly there, but you had to fly there to strap the Vision Pro to your face? How much time did you get with the device? Like, what was that whole process of even?
Well, wait. Can we talk about the Mac Mini and the Mac? I'm just kidding.
No. We're not one more thinging this. We might, but at the end, what was the process for getting kind of like in a position to experience this thing? What was the environment that they allowed you to test it? Before we get into, either the specs or your experience with the device, what was the process to like even? What was the experience of experiencing it? How controlled of an environment was that?
That's meta.
Sure. That's a solid question. So the way you get around on Apple campus when you're visiting is they have like these electric golf carts, and I never really know where they're taking me. I just go through security, get in the back of the golf cart, and they take me somewhere. And awesome. I kind of recognize this area that they took me to where they were doing the demos for the Vision Pro. It's like beside their gym, but it was entirely brand new. So to my understanding, they built this entire new building and new structure specifically to show off this device. I don't really know why, because it looked very similar to other places on Apple's campus that I've tested stuff out before. But they had these little like almost office meeting rooms, and this one central demo station where they had the Vision Pro just sitting on like a pole, but you couldn't touch it. You could ask questions about it. You were allowed to do that, but you weren't allowed to touch it or interact with it in any way. So I got ferried to this very specific area, and then the first thing that they did was they scanned the front of my face, they scanned the side of my face. If you've used Apple's AirPods Pro, you'll be familiar with that process. What I was told is that is to get the proper fit because the headset is modular. They didn't really expand on that, like what exactly is modular about the fit, but that's what I was told. And then I went into a room, and it was kind of like the experience of going to an optometrist, where they asked me a bunch of questions about my eyesight to determine if I need the magnetic lenses.
Are you one of the glasses wearing members of society? Because that's an important component of this now going forward. Normally, when we're talking consumer tech, it's pretty much like, is it too big or too small for my hand? Don't hold it that way kind of stuff. But this is, I think, speaks to the personal nature of the device. This is right up on your irises. Did you have to do any special work for that?
So some people tried it the day after the event. Some people tried it the second day. And I had heard about this process. So my intention was to wear my glasses to the event just so I could see what that was like. Totally slipped my mind, wore my contacts that day. The process was just there kind of like for show, right? Like, so I learned what it was like, but I didn't have the magnetic lenses in there.
Gotcha. Because they'd have to fabricate those and get them to you, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. People that I talked to said that were wearing glasses said that it was good, but sometimes felt a little bit off because I don't think they had people's exact prescriptions on hand, but they could find something that was pretty close. Because you can't wear glasses with this on, at least not in its current iteration.
Makes sense.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, then let's get into the meat of it. People have been like, you guys have been vamping for 8 minutes. Tell us, Patrick, on Mobile Syrup, which is a publication people should read to get this information. But if they don't, they can just use this podcast, I guess. You wrote that Apple has set a new standard for AR and VR with the Vision Pro. What was the old standard, and how come this is the new standard?
One of the things that I've always taken issue with VR and AR to a lesser extent is this thing that I refer to as the screen door effect. Like, you put the headset on, the experience is very engrossing, but it doesn't look real. There's like this barrier, and to me, that's the low resolution.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a mesh that's in front of your face, so it never feels like it's real. I've tried most of the major VR headsets, and with the Vision Pro, this was the first time that I really couldn't see the pixels. Like, they're there, obviously, it's not perfect. I wouldn't say that it looks like the real world, but it's closer than I've ever seen before. So whether I was like watching a clip of Avatar 2 or doing this cool butterfly demo, whatever experience I was going through felt far more, I guess I would say, like engrossing than any other VR headset that I've used before. And that was the key thing for me, was that refresh rate, which made the motion very fluid, and then the resolution. That heads and toes above everything else that I've seen before in the VR space.
Clearly, like, the technology is superior to anything that's on the market at the moment. Like, I have the Quest 2, and just getting the diopter thing right, it's like you either have a wide face or a not wide face.
So annoying.
I'm at 2.3 diopters, and it's just really frustrating. And so I've never been able to get a really good immersive experience. But what I'm curious is, it is interesting that Apple, when they showed the use cases off and they like rotated, I watched the keynote and they show like it's in the workplace, it's in the home, it's in the whatever. They started in the workplace. Well, they showed it to a person sitting in the house, but the use cases were about worky stuff. And then they're like, oh yeah, games are cool. But Apple does nothing, to your point, by coincidence. How did it feel? What did they want you to move in a particular direction? They're like, look at Pages. You use Pages all the time. Mm-hmm. Or how did that,
like, in multitask? And
yeah, like we talked about all the features in the eyeballs, and so you can read on Mobile Syrup, like what you can see your eyes and all that other stuff. But were they pushing the story in a particular direction? Could you tell?
Yeah, they definitely didn't want anything to do with gaming. Like, this device will obviously play games. Like, we know that's going to be a thing. Like, it's undeniable. But they were definitely pushing like a productivity focus. Like, you can launch the Notes app, you can browse Safari, you can do all of the things that you can do with your iPad, essentially, with this device. And then the other thing that they were pushing a lot, which was kind of surprising because it's stuff that I saw like, I don't know, close to 10 years ago now from Samsung with the Gear VR, is like videos, like watch Avatar 2 in 3D in this headset.
Yeah, that's
and it looked great. It was impressive, but it's things I've done before, you know?
When you're talking about that experience of it, the refresh rate, and then the I guess the lack of that screen dooring effect, were they pushing that? Was that consistent across all the visual experiences that you're having? Was it? I'm interested in how this device stacks up to other devices when it comes to, hey, watching an Avatar movie versus running an app or browsing a web page versus maybe some of the mixed reality component where you're seeing people in front of you while looking at AR stuff. Like, was that consistent across the board? And I guess I'm asking because I want to understand how this thing compares to other products, because for me, seeing like, hey, basically 2 4K screens in each eyeball or for your eyeballs and stuff is like, oh, they are trying to trap or they're trying to slap a MacBook onto your face with some really expensive glass. But I'm wondering, can you identify which of those kind of experiences really stood out in comparison to the other products out there? Is it across the board, or is it in certain others? If you were to watch Avatar on the HTC Vive or whatever, would it basically be the same?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. I would say across the board, 100% best fidelity experience that I've had. And the one thing that I keep coming back to is when I was watching that clip of Avatar, I felt like I could sit there. I don't know if I would make it through the whole thing because the demo was only 30 minutes long, but I did feel like I could actually watch a movie within that headset. And that's not something that I've ever experienced before. I've tried to like even watch an episode of a TV show on Netflix or something like that with other headsets, and it would either get uncomfortable, feel too heavy, my face would get too sweaty. With what Apple's doing, it felt like that might be possible. Of course, I didn't do it. I'd have to try it. But the fidelity, like it didn't feel like I was missing anything. Like it was the same or better as watching a movie on like the big flat screen I have in my living room.
Or
that's
certainly
not something I've been
better
able
than
to,
a laptop on your belly when you're like sitting in bed, just being like,
yeah,
I don't wanna
exactly.
get up.
That same kind of thing.
But that's a little bit of image
then,
fidelity and comfort.
Twofold. And then the demo, just to answer the other part of your question, the demo that stood out the most to me and was actually unique, because a lot of the stuff that Apple showed off to me was pretty pedestrian and expected. It was like a greatest hits of VR to some extent. It was this demo where there's a bunch of dinosaurs on a wall. They start like popping out of the wall. Seen that before. That's something I've experienced in VR a couple times with different headsets. In this situation, the Apple rep told me to like put out my hand, and a dragonfly flew out from the wall. And because it has this 3-dimensional feature too, as well, it landed on my fingers, and you could like pull your finger forward, and it was 3D. It just looked like it was real in a way, more so than I've ever seen before from a VR headset. And it reacted naturally to my finger too. Like I was turning it and it was just locked in place on it. That said, some of the other like media people that were at the event I spoke to said that part of the demo totally broke for them. It didn't work at all. The dragonfly missed their finger. It clipped through it. It just all fell apart. But for me, it was one of the neatest experiences that I've had in VR AR to date, I would say.
What else do you feel like Apple nailed here in terms of like, so you comfort, it seems like it was actually strapped to your face in the way that it should be strapped to your face, that kind of fidelity thing. What other components to the device? Like we haven't really talked about, like you talked about using your hand, but the UX for this thing is either your eyes or your fingers, right? What was the experience kind of like pinching to click or things like that in comparison to like, I've never used the basically brass knuckles of most other VR devices that you're trying to use, but did that seem to translate? Are they 80% of the way there? Like 90%? Like what was did it make sense to you?
That was the other thing that I thought was pretty impactful, was the way that you control it. When I go into these demos, I sometimes like to try to break whatever the experience is just to see how far I can push it. So with the eye tracking, which I've been describing as like, that's your mouse when you're interacting with this device. I was darting my eyes all over the place and like doing the little claw clipping motion, trying to make it not
Did the
work.
Apple guy smack
But
you?
it was so he was getting a little frustrated with me. But it was so responsive that I couldn't break it. It just it worked every single time, and I really didn't expect it to. That was the thing, based on the rumors, because I've been reporting on this forever. I didn't think it would work, and it did.
Did they nail the puking? Like, you know, I know there's the Oculus or the Meta Quest Pro, I guess is Facebook's or Meta's fanciest headset, which is still a fraction, a third of the cost of this or a half. Did they, I've known lots of developers, especially in the early days of VR. It's one thing to have a TV out there and you're looking at it. I'm pointing in the distance for those who are listening, out way in front of you, and just watching two-dimensional-ish stuff go by. But I remember in the early days of VR, developers write stuff where the camera kind of moves and people would vomit if you get with the eye and brain isn't expecting, notwithstanding the fact that, you know, getting the refresh rate right and you can be disoriented. Do you feel from the obviously limited interaction you had that the fidelity of the screens and all that stuff, in that assemblage of stuff, that won't make you nauseous, or too soon to tell?
That's no, I think that makes sense. So I suffer from VR motion sickness.
Notoriously
back in the early
pukey.
days when I was using VR.
Me too.
I
That's why I'm
didn't,
asking. For a
and
friend.
then I slowly developed it over time.
Okay.
And that was something that I was watching out for when I had the headset on. I don't know what it was. I tried to get Apple to talk about it a little bit to see what they actually did to, I guess, acknowledge that that's an issue and prevent it. They didn't really say anything to me.
But they have these polished
substantial.
Apple buckets next to the
Yeah.
the device, and like the
$1,500
polishing cloth.
for a bucket
Yeah.
that attaches to the.
Exactly.
You just barf directly into the Mac Pro, just into the Mac Pro shell. That's all.
It's
you gotta
cheaper.
do. But yeah, no, it was good. I didn't run into any issues. I didn't get sweaty. It was great. And I think for me, it comes down to the refresh rate. It goes all the way up to, I think, 90, close to 90 hertz.
Mhm.
And that makes the movement feel much more fluid than other headsets that I've used. And my guess, I don't know for sure, is that's why.
Yeah, and I believe I've read that they're doing some frame rate matching for certain pieces of content. So if reality is being projected
movies,
at a certain resolution, you're still watching the movie at the frame rate that's like more consumable. Is there anything that you kind of felt like they haven't nailed or they're a step behind on? Or is this really just, hey, Apple's put in the work to make a device that's like minimum 2x more expensive than anything else on the market and it shows? Or is there obvious gaps where either through design or implementation, you're like, this other device does it better?
So there's two things I would say. The software and the apps that I tried out, they're just not there. Like there's nothing that stands out to me to make this device worth buying. I think it's cool hardware that'll convince developers to start making interesting third-party apps for it. But Apple's first-party stuff, there's nothing that stood out to me.
Does this feel like the watch? You remember when the watch came out? They're like,
it did, yeah.
They're like, you're going to use it for apps, and then after 2 or 3 years, they're like, hey, it's just fitness.
Yeah, and basic
They didn't
watch
know.
stuff.
That's 100%
fitness and
what this feels like.
notifications.
Interesting. Okay.
Well, so this is interesting because you kind of answered my next couple of questions in terms of like whether or not you'd buy it or things like that. And then, you know, is this device even viable without developers building some killer apps for it? The Apple Watch is instructive because it's an incredibly popular device now that really only needs a couple core apps for it to be useful to some people. I am still struck by this idea of this device as a phone strapped to your face or a MacBook strapped to your face. And it seems like one of the core elements here is because there's fidelity, like you can just do computing stuff or media stuff and you don't need much else. And it seems like the fidelity is such where that would be a really annoying, ridiculous prospect for most other VR devices. And then this one, it kind of seems like a logical extension of maybe the AirPods Pro. It's like, hey, did you like the noise cancellation and the stereo sound? Well, why don't you strap this extra component to your face and completely tune out the world? Does that resonate with you, Patrick? Because I think you guys are both AirPods Pro owners, right? Or Max?
Yep.
Both, yeah.
Pro and Max. Do you guys like strapping Apple products?
But I don't think
both,
it doesn't have I don't think it has the spatial audio, but it doesn't have the noise cancellation. I don't think the vision, does it?
No, they're kind of these weird headphones that just sit on the side of your head.
Right.
But you can wear AirPods with them. Like if you don't want to use those, you can just strap AirPods over top. Yeah.
Weird.
Jeez. Okay, but that as someone who uses similar Apple products, that wasn't enough for you to say, hey, I would want to use that? Is that because you don't think that experience is enough? You just wouldn't pay that price for it? Because you're very much a watch TV in bed kind of guy or gaming in bed kind of guy, right? Like with the Switch or other devices. This kind of seems, system built for Patrick O'Rourke, who doesn't like using his legs or standing up in any way. Or
I do hate.
He is just ahead. I don't think anyone knows that.
I do hate moving around. I just sit in this chair all day. What I would say is, so one of the things that they touted during the keynote is the mirroring of whatever you're doing on your Mac. You can do that directly on the Vision Pro. They didn't show that off, I think, pretty intentionally, because I don't know if it's there yet, and I don't know if it's really working as well as they showed off during the keynote. And that was one of the things that I really wanted to try out during the hands-on, because I do think what you're saying, Douglas, there is utility to that. Like maybe that's the killer app, that you can do all of these things in this virtual space that you can do on your Mac. Like Brad, who also works at Mobile Store, was at the event with me, and he was saying, like, I would love to be able to edit a Premiere video within this, like Adobe Premiere. And I was like, you're crazy, Brad. Why would you want to do that? But there's other YouTubers that I talk to that are also interested in doing the same thing, but we haven't tried that out yet. And I guess also for me, I can already do all that stuff on my Mac in a very easy way. I don't know if there's any benefit to doing it within the headset, if that makes sense. They haven't shown me that it makes it easier or more intuitive or a better experience yet.
I think we're reaching the point here where it's not going to be easy to kind of ask one question, get the answer. And we're talking about a couple of things, whether or not this is going to be compelling for certain people as just a media consumption device, or if it's going to need more, also speaks one to the price. And then whether or not, I guess, we feel developers are going to be able to build killer apps for this thing, or I guess also if this is just a very expensive dev kit to see if they can. And maybe Patrick, can you talk a little bit about, like, given that you said Apple didn't seem to be that interested in gaming when they were at least talking to you, isn't that, like, I guess maybe where are they expecting these apps to come from? Or is it still just, AR, VR versions of traditional Mac OS apps, or are there radically new experiences? Because I'm finding.
Did you fall into the calendar? Like, did you fall into the calendar and like show up at a
I would have
meeting?
loved to have done
what
that.
if skeuomorphic is everything?
That'd be funny if that came back.
The meta skew. Yeah, you have to manually move pages. But I know actually it's a joke, but I think it speaks to this idea, right? Because, we had Dan Olson folding ideas on this podcast, and his most recent video is that basically the metaverse is a dead mall. We're trying to create a thing to solve a problem that we don't really have. And the people that are mostly interested in forwarding this agenda are like Mark Zuckerberg, and then a whole bunch of grifters that are hoping for a new digital land grab. Apple is not that company in a variety of different ways. This reads way more AR heavy. It reads much more isolated as an experience than as a social experience. I'm wondering then where they're expecting developers to build new applications, given that the comp seems to be the MacBook on your face, and they don't want to do the stuff where most VR developers are going, which is like like the dinosaurs running through, or Beat Saber or things like that. Did you get any sense of maybe either in what they were announcing or how they were talking of where they're expecting developers to kind of pick this stuff up?
We talked to a couple Canadian developers too about that exact question, because I think to some extent Apple is almost like throwing this out there, like throwing it at the wall, hoping that third-party developers take it and they run with it. They don't know what this device is going to turn into. It's the first gen product. They're just hoping that third-party developers treat it in the same way that they treated the iPhone, which I would argue is in some ways built on third-party apps to an extent. That's part of why it got so popular. They're hoping to replicate that again with the Vision Pro, but they don't necessarily know at this stage in the game what that killer app is going to be. And all of the developers that I talked to were like, yeah, we could add this cool VR, AR thing to our existing app, but we're not really sure what to do with it yet. So I think, I don't know if it'll work out for Apple, but I think it's going to be at the very least a few years until we see anything, I don't want to say groundbreaking, but anything at least interesting from developers in terms of doing some sort of original concept in AR for this headset.
Yeah, that's really tough, Rob, because like when you look at this, the past couple of platforms that Apple have launched, hoping that developers would come and swoop in and offer something net new, where we covered the Apple Watch. I think the Apple TV is another one where Apple really had a chance there to like own the biggest screen in the home. And geez, Patrick, for reasons that we were discussing back when I was at Mobile Syrup, really cuffed that up because they made it difficult for developers to port current experiences over there, and they didn't really open up an opportunity for net new. I take Patrick's point about the iPhone really being forwarded by an age of third-party applications, but I also remember that a shit ton of people bought that device before it had an app store because the core experience was compelling enough.
Exactly.
I guess coming into this conversation, and we talked about this on the way back from last week's podcast, just driving home, I was really assuming that this was like Apple's sensory deprivation device where, like face hugger, Mac OS with a better screen than you can probably, or a similar screen that you'd buy as a flat screen and things like that. And all the spatial audio and all the other things that we've been working on. And if you just really love that Apple experience, you can just have it on your face and you don't need to talk to anybody in a lot of environments. That doesn't seem super compelling to our most socially awkward tech reporter who doesn't like using his legs. Where I guess, would you be worried that the people coming back from WWDC aren't obviously saying, hey, here's a use case, I would start this tomorrow? And we're like, because waiting to see what developers do is a little bit of a Hail Mary as much as it is a necessary function of an ecosystem.
Totally. And I'd want to reflect back both to both of you on this, because each device that Apple is always not the first entrant into any market. They didn't create the first MP3 player, not the first phone, not the first wireless headset, wireless earphones, but they study the market, they figure out what makes sense, and then they come to market in that space. Once they've got a compelling value proposition that usually involves something about design and integration and all that other stuff and aesthetics and usability. The watch, like the phone was a phone and you could text on it. Like that was remember Steve Jobs' whole thing was like, there's three things. It's like a pager, a phone, and a cat. I forget the third thing it was replacing, but it was like all these things in one. You didn't need an app store.
It was an iPod.
That's right. An iPod.
Thank you. And
all three in one.
Right. And the iPod itself was, in those days, and I had one, I had a Diamond Rio. You had a little micro. It was you don't want to know the technology that stored the MP3 files. It could store 10 and
flash drives. Baby.
Right. But there's like these weird flash cards. I don't even remember the technology. And the iPod is like, here's 1,000. Yeah. You're like, oh, well, that's even better.
Physical hard drive, baby.
Headphones, noise canceling or no wires. Cool. The watch was the first mistake they made, I think, in that there was a market for watches. The market was sports. And they're like, aha, this will be more than sports. And they were wrong. And I think the problem with this, and by the way, I like it. I think it's cool. I can't afford it. But I'm happy to see a value prop that's not just, look, these games will look better. Like another VR headset that's just leaning in on games. Mm-hmm. At least they're thinking about it differently, which I think we can talk about in a second. But there is no fundamental use case for this. You're not buying it to replace a thing, or it's not better at something, at least that I can tell. So that it is only a Hail Mary. And it feels a little bit like we invested, I think Bloomberg reported 15 billion US into the development of this thing. Yeah.
It's been like 8 years or something like that.
Right. And I mean, if you think about it, all iPhones and iPads in the last 4 or 5 years have LiDAR that does nothing. Nobody uses it for anything. Maybe for the photo, when you do the portrait photo, that's the only use it ever has. And they've been pushing always in their WWDC demos, look, iOS, you can play this tabletop game. You just have to hold your iPad up like this, like a crazy person. No one would do that. So it feels like they're like, it is now time to bring this to market because we spent 15 billion and it'll be another 15 billion in another 8 years before this is a usable thing. And so I think they're hoping, I actually, one last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop. I don't know. There's been a lot of, did you know the Dyson face mask?
Yeah, the Dyson Zone. Yeah.
Yeah. Where it's like, it's high quality-ish headphones. And then it, for those who haven't seen it, and there's a mask that runs a fan actively to theoretically clear your, it's like an active mask, basically. It's like, I don't know, 1,500 US or something dumb. And the idea there I think it was MBKHD who said at the show, he's like, no one's supposed to buy this. You're supposed to talk about it, and then you go buy the vacuum. Is that what this is? It's like, cool, you ideate. It's going to be over here. Now go buy Max.
I don't know about that. And there is a great video because it spoke to how that product actually made things. If you were using it for its intended purpose, was just like purify the air around you, it actually made a bunch of things worse.
Yeah, it didn't actually do
beyond the fact that it's had two giant fans spinning up in your ears the whole day. I think this is a little bit different. The LiDAR tech in their phones makes a lot of sense because you can see all the ways, whether it's spatial audio or that stuff, AR kit for a decade now, almost. Yeah, they've been laying the groundwork for this stuff.
Exactly.
But I guess, Patrick, who do you think is going to be buying this thing if it's not developers? Because I'm wondering, knowing that Rob is like a Apple early adopter, usually buys the first version, even if he has last year's version, and it's slightly different. Like he's rocking what, like a black MacBook Pro M2?
Midnight.
Yeah. Just a
Air.
And I got this sad M1 Pro here. The fact that he's not going to buy one makes me wonder if this is just a developer kit until the price drops enough that they can sell this for $2,500, and then people will be like, yeah, okay, it's that Dyson, it's that Apple Premium. I can use this for a couple specific things. Who is signing up day one to buy this, if not just maybe rich people who are bought into the Apple experience?
I think it's a developer kit, 100% developer kit, and then maybe some very hardcore Apple fans. But I know a lot of hardcore Apple fans, and none of them have said that they would run out and purchase this on day one. Not that you can in Canada, anyways. We don't even know when it's launching here, but I think it's definitely a developer kit, and it's the start of, to what Rob was saying, this is the start of a long game for Apple. They had to release some sort of hardware. It had to come out. They've spent so much money. Something had to come to fruition here. But this isn't what they want their AR, VR future to look like. What they want is a sleek looking pair of just glasses, something that's, and I do think this looks cool, but I think that's something that would look cool to a more general audience, like a very simple pair of glasses or something like that features the same technology.
Yeah, it certainly looks premium. I think for a 1.0 version, it's incredibly high quality in its build construction. And maybe this is, I thought at some point we were going to talk a lot about the competitors here, but it's clearly we're not AR VR people, because most people aren't, because it's you do seem to be buying not only a hypothetical piece of tech, but the price constrained version of that, where it's whether it's Meta or everyone else, they've already made the decision where it's well, we've got to get this at a certain price point just to get it in the market so that people can buy it, so we can try to, by version 5, we'll have an ecosystem type of thing. And Apple can just be like, no, we're going to charge $3,500 because we won't put out anything that's below this experience level. And our starting point is so much further beyond everyone else in price and build quality, but they're still playing that same game where they've got to get somewhere with it. My friends, let's cut to the chase. You're a founder, you're hungry, you're fast, and you need a legal partner that matches your pace. The answer? The BetaKit Podcast returning sponsor, Good Lawyer. If you're a regular listener, then you already know they aren't your grandpa's law firm. Business-focused lawyers who are in the trenches with you, offering advice that doesn't slow you down. Now, I could go on and on reading testimonials from some of the fastest growing businesses in Canada about their experiences with Good Lawyer's fractional counsel service. But if you're planning on being in Toronto for Collision, which is fast approaching, then this year I can do you one better. If you haven't heard already, Good Lawyer is throwing their second annual yacht party, bringing together 600 startup investors, stakeholders, and fellow founders, including many of their scale-up clients who can tell you exactly about their fractional legal experience firsthand. This yacht party will undoubtedly be one of the can't-miss events of Collision, and even the biggest boat in Lake Ontario is going to run out of space. So head over to goodlawyer.ca, ping them on chat, and see if they have any tickets left before it's too late, so we can see you on the good ship Good Lawyer. It's interesting. I thought there was going to be much more positivity towards that certain type of person that you see on the plane that's always wearing incredibly expensive jogging pants. That is like their like designer jogging pants for the plane, that has the AirPods Max, that, you know, brings their own sleeping mask, that just wants to, in an aesthetically pleasing way, tune themselves up from the world. And I think those are the types of people that really like buying Apple products because of the brand component and this. And I'm wondering if that's...
We talked about this last week too, right? Like, remember when the watch came out, John Gruber, who has a blog, Daring Fireball, was speculating on the price. And they had a gold watch, if you remember, when the first one came out. And that, he was like, oh, it's like $8,000 or $10,000 or something ridiculous. And I was like, that's insane. And sure enough, one of the 18 karat gold watch was, you know, $10,000 or something stupid. And first of all, we could buy an entry level one. We could afford an entry level one.
I don't know, my Apple Watch Zero that lasted 8 years before,
which is impressive because I went crazy.
I've had a long time.
Yeah. And also, like, I like buying first gen stuff, but I wouldn't pay $10,000 for a piece of technology, even though the gold, it was like, that's insane. Whereas this is, that is that persona. That is the person who buys the Hermes whatever.
Yeah.
But it's like releasing the Apple Watch and saying there is one. It's the Hermes gold one, and it's $10,000. You can't buy the aluminum one.
And there's some benefits here to this, right? Because this isn't a device where you have to set up a bunch of like quadrant cameras in your space, hook it up to a PC. You don't have dumb little wrist things here. It is a more elegant version of the typical VR AR experience. But you're right. It doesn't seem like in that Apple Watch example, they were trying to appeal to luxury people interested in devices of those types and say, listen, we play in that space. There isn't like a luxury VR demographic because there is no like customer demographic at scale that's interested in that. It's interesting. In this conversation, I'm maybe a little bit less optimistic about Apple's prospects about this going forward, just because, and I guess maybe tech bloggers aren't the types of people that we're talking about that have the designer sweatpants to like tune out the world. But maybe let's carry forward this idea and project into the future that long game of what the use case is for this. Because I mentioned Dan Olson previously. He's like, the metaverse is a dead mall. This isn't going to happen. This isn't Snow Crash. It's not these things. And then you have Matthew Ball, who's exactly on the opposite side. He wrote a book about how the metaverse will revolutionize everything. We've been trying to get Matthew on the podcast. He keeps saying no, even though he continues to engage in my tweets about our different takes upon the metaverse. He thinks that what Apple is doing is exactly the same as Facebook, and I completely disagree. Let's talk about why. Patrick, you wrote in your hands-on with this that you were talking about maybe a bit of a cyberpunk future with this. Others have written about the extreme loneliness inherent to this device that is maybe unique in Apple's portfolio. All the other, and it's not like they're a social company. It's not like they're like Facebook. They've never really shown an interest with that. They did it like once with like iTunes, and they build, experiences for individuals at high quality with like software and hardware. But those experiences usually allow people to better connect, whether even if it's just the music and engaging, moving around the world, or iMessage is all like that lock-in is built around group chat, or using your camera and your photo prowess to like help people share their experiences with others. Even the dumb little avatars that they have now in iOS is like them, trying to do a better version of that. There doesn't seem to be a single social component to this. I know they talked about like business productivity, but it was much more around, hey, developers, you strap this thing on, you can have as many monitors as you want sitting in front of you because they're not real. And then even like the use in and around the home videos were like, this dad will remember this birthday forever because he's capturing it through that technology.
Headset. There's no other way to capture that photo.
And I'm wondering how you're feeling about this, Patrick. Like I can't help but note that the intro video for this device matched shots from the Ready Player One movie, which is like actually about a metaverse dystopia. If you extend this to Patrick's lived experience, he's rapidly progressing towards the people in the movie WALL-E.
The dream.
Is it just that like Apple really knows screens and what happens on screens, and their approach to this was like, we're going to strap a screen on your face, but because we're strapping it around your face, that is a very lonely thing? Or is there another development track for the experiences here that Apple is opening up, or are they just going more isolated than everybody else? I'm just trying to game theory out where this is going.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's nothing like, there's no like Apple social network that they showed off or anything like that, but there's some inherently, I guess, software, hardware features that make it feel a little bit more social. One of the things that was very neat that I tested out was, so it features a digital crown on the side. That's the little spinny knob that's on the Apple Watch. One of the things that you can do with the digital crown, with the Vision Pro, is say you're watching Avatar. Someone walks into your room or whatever, you have it on your head. You just spin that digital crown a little bit, and that person that walked in will instantly appear, and the experience that you're in will fade away.
Yeah.
And there's latency-free pass-through that allows you to just have a conversation with them. So there's that somewhat.
Yeah, but Patrick, let's hold right there. Is that a social experience, or is that using literally a giant like wheel to raise or lower the level of isolation that you're in? You were talking about on other cheaper
maybe
devices.
Not social.
You've got that screen door effect. It's like Apple solved that resolution wise, but then they built a firewall that you can kind of move up or down depending upon what you're doing, right?
Maybe not social, but less isolating than wearing a headset like other VR headsets normally, I guess is what I'm getting at. It felt like I could still be connected to the real world if I wanted to. Whereas if I'm wearing like the Oculus Quest 2, I got to take the whole thing off and the whole world is blocked out from me, where this was kind of melding the two to some extent. And then there's the eyesight stuff where you have the eyes on the front of the camera. None of that was working during my demo. I should probably mention that. They didn't show that off at all. They weren't really interested in talking about it, which makes me think that it's not quite ready or working.
Did you see the FaceTime version of you? Like, could you see what that looked like?
That was the next thing I was going to talk about.
Okay.
I didn't get my own persona, quote unquote. That's what they're calling the avatars.
Okay.
But in the middle of my demo, someone like an Apple rep called into my experience and was just like floating in front of me in FaceTime as a persona. And I found the personas extremely off-putting. Like I hated it. It was very uncanny valley where they looked like a real person, but something was off about it a little bit. It was like a video game that almost looks too good. It's too realistic. That kind of deal.
Did it blink?
It was just weird.
Yeah, it was very strange. It was very. It was my least favorite part of the demo. The FaceTime
they talked about at the beginning. They're like, oh, they had all this FaceTime stuff at the beginning of the thing of the keynote. And I was like, yes, you could FaceTime. What did the other people see? And it took them another hour, half an hour to be like, and then this is what we do. But they didn't really show it still. So I was just like, to your point is like, what is social? Like, is where's the social start and stop? It really mushy.
I guess we have to ask the question here is like, do we feel like Apple's approach to this is going to work? And I say that not in terms of like price point or specs or whatever. I think they've obviously, more people are going to be aware of AR and VR now because one, Apple has done it, but in the way that they've done it, that people are going to be more open to trying this. But I'm also just wondering if this is going to be like a HomePod or honestly even an Apple TV in their portfolio where like you could see them if it repeated the steps of the iPhone, you could really see how this could be a game changer. But if they can't get there or if they're not interested in getting there, it's just another screen that runs a version of Mac OS with a couple of core apps and like you can stream sports on it and do this. Like, let's get a bit of a vibe check here. I talked about this, Dan Olson on the one side and Matthew Ball on the other. Patrick, where are you on that hype scale?
It really feels like the HomePod to me right now. Like really, really good hardware. Blown away by the hardware. Super impressive. But there's nothing on the software or the app side, or we've talked about it here, the use case side, that makes me want to run out and buy one. Or any of the experiences that I went through during the demo that really stood out as unique and different. So best headset I've ever used. Super excited about that aspect of it, the technology powering it. But something needs to catch up on the software or the app side, whether it's something that Apple's doing behind the scenes or something that a third-party developer comes out with. Because otherwise, I honestly don't see it working. I don't think it's there quite yet.
Rob, do you agree with that? You got a different take on it? Like, again, this is the first Apple product that you're not buying right away.
I was just doing the financial conversion in Canadian dollars to
It's
see what it was.
$5,000. It's $5,000.
Yeah,
It'd be
just
$5,000.
yeah.
100% it would be
It's
$5,000.
46 something. So yeah,
and when it
it's
comes
probably
out,
going to buy 49999.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this in the podcast before. I mean, at least you got to try it. I actually, if somebody gave me it, I probably would use it. I don't think I can afford 5,000. I'll just buy a car and for that price. You know what I mean? I think that the problem that has come up here is that I think Facebook did the right thing, which is they're like, we're done with social networks. We've done all we can. There is no other human we can get. There's no other thing I can buy, maybe TikTok. There's nothing else I can do. So I need to do something else. And this metaverse thing seems cool. I think that they were too early. They're just too early. They're on iteration. The universe is on iteration 5. We need to be on iteration 7 for this metaverse thing to have a chance. So I'm on neither side of whether the metaverse can work or not, because I think we're too early. And I think that Apple, while they are a late entrant into the virtual reality, augmented reality space, they are an early entrant they're late into the VR space. They're early into the AR space. Mm-hmm. Microsoft tried it, just shut down the HoloLens.
Yep.
And I think that, and Google tried it obviously way before that with the Glass. I think that Apple came late enough to the VR space, but the use case for VR hasn't been really there's no stick in the ground, with the exception of gaming. And even then, it's still a very niche thing. So I think that just their timing is stinky. And yes, they can sit there and wait, but it's too bad it didn't come out a little bit later.
I got into this fight with Matt Ball when you mentioned VR. Nowhere on Apple's website do they use the term VR at all.
Yeah.
And some of that is always, Apple defined. Like, I don't think they necessarily use the idea of smartphone because they had an iPhone, and the implication that the iPhone was different than the average smartphone. It was an iPhone. But I also think it's like they're not trying to showcase a pure, use this to step into a virtual world that you navigate, because those things don't fundamentally exist right now in any compelling way. And I think they're much more interested in, Patrick, as you were saying, you can have a firewall to the world that you turn on off, and then you can do your Apple stuff that you love with this device if you want it. But I'm wondering, we've been evaluating how successful that might be and how just building that might not be enough, and there's going to need to be more time. I wonder if we close this off on asking the existential question that kind of undermines the entire episode, is that whether or not this, Facebook and Meta's motivation to move towards the metaverse is a purely self-interested capitalist one, because they realize that their core mode of social might die and they don't want to be disrupted. Apple likes screens, and they like selling you more screens, and those screens connect in great ways. I'm wondering, as a society, do we actually feel like this is the next thing? Do we want it to be the next thing? Or is there just a bit of an inevitability with what's been written and speculated that we're kind of being like, oh yeah, of course, one day we're going to have this? Because I would also say people said that for like a really long time about flying cars, and no one really needs flying cars, and they're really expensive and they don't make sense. And there are a bunch of other solutions. And I'm wondering if Apple ends up saying the same thing, like, well, if developers can figure out some stuff and just a little bit more time, we're not just in another flying car situation where this isn't actually a real thing that anyone wants. Maybe there's going to be some eventual AR integrations that we have. Maybe the technology will get down to what Google Glass wants to be. Because I don't know if you've seen the photo comparisons between the Vision Pro and Google Glass now, but Google Glass looks way less ridiculous than it did when that thing launched. So there is a decade-long time progression here. I'm just wondering if we feel like anyone actually wants the metaverse, or if we've just been told for so long that is the next step of digital human interaction, that we're just expecting someone to build it. Like, where, beyond the Apple thing, where are you guys at on AR, VR experiences or the metaverse going forward? We'll go
beyond.
Oh, we'll go Patrick. You go first. You're our guest. You're our friend of the pod.
Beyond the gaming aspect of it, personally, I don't see myself ever using a device like this just to do like my daily work and my daily job. And that's like the vision that Apple's selling right now, that I can do all of this stuff within a virtual reality headset. But then on the other hand, Apple's famous for like convincing people that they need a product even though they don't want it, right? And I think to some extent that's what they're hoping will happen again with this. Like
Well,
during my
but is that
briefings,
a product or their product, right?
their product, yeah. They during my briefing they kept saying they kept using this term spatial computer. Like they're trying to invent the next product category. That's what they want to do. They want to have some sort of hardware to push into the future. That's what this is. They just haven't convinced me that it really is the future yet. Would I like it to be beyond gaming? Because I do enjoy VR, AR gaming. I don't honestly know. I was very impressed with what I experienced at the event, at least in terms of the hardware, not the software. And I kind of see the potential there with some aspects of it, like the way that you interact with the device. I've said sometimes during certain interviews, like it felt almost as revolutionary as like using an iPhone touchscreen for the first time. The whole clicking and eye tracking, it was mind blowing. There's something there. There's like a kernel of possibly the future of computing within this device. I just don't know if they're going to be able to convince me or even just the average Apple user in the future that that's what they should want to be using.
Yeah. Your aside from gaming statement is hilarious for a guy who literally plays farm games on his Switch. But I'll put that aside because you made a better point. The spatial computing thing is a really important thing that we haven't really discussed yet. I think because most people are taking a look at it as just another Apple branding thing. I actually think it reinforces some of what we were just talking about. It was like they don't want to bet on AR or VR or the metaverse, but they're integrating this technology that is allowing for, if not a compelling product, these individual experiences, Patrick, that you're speaking to that are like, will become at some point components of our digital experience. Like that stuff is next level, even in just the way that they're integrating all those different cameras. So you can actually minority report the screen rather than having to use an interface.
Crazy.
Like that is legitimate. And it's more, that is truly spatial computing, not metaverse stuff. But I guess, Rob, where's your take on that? Like, have you ever been you're of a certain age when Snow Crash came out. Have you just been jonesing for 30 years now, being like, one day I'm going to be a ninja pizza deliverer?
Well, I know I'm a different generation than Patrick, but I'm sort of in your boat. I think that often, to your point, every time we try to predict what the future is going to look like, we're wrong. The things that we like, Twitch never made sense to me. Like, who would watch somebody else play a video game, and why would Amazon pay $1 billion for it? That just, when I was younger, I didn't want to watch people play a video game. I wanted to play the video game. So I don't see I think the metaverse as we conceive of it at the moment doesn't make any sense. I think that this spatial computing thing, I understand that they're trying to relabel AR and think about that stuff. It feels to me like it's too late for VR, which is fine, and too early for AR. It's in this weird half pregnant zone of a proof of concept, which makes, going back to Patrick's point about being a dev kit, if anybody's read anything about how Apple does physical product development, I think with the iPod, they like disassembled the parts and they put this big box around it. So one person was working on the volume control. One person was working on the headphone jack. And you didn't know what was inside the big box, but it just did a bunch of interesting things and nobody knew exactly what it's supposed to do. This feels like a very shiny version of that, which is like there will be a future and all of these things will come together in a way that you don't know what, it'll be really cool. We don't know what it is. You don't know what it is. So I think it's not the metaverse. The metaverse still has a prospective possibility, not the way that I've seen Facebook conceive of it, and not the way that I've seen Apple not conceive of it. I just feel like it's, I think AR or augmented reality or something to that effect. And I mean, Tim Cook has said this a million times. It's AR that he's interested in.
Yeah.
Whatever you can call it, it's like overlaying stuff on the world that you live will be a killer app. It's probably 10 or 15 years away. How do you think about it? Are you all in on the metaverse?
Well, to your point, I will say that this device shows some obvious, consistent integration design decisions that I think we have to give credit for. Like, beyond just the fact that the amount of camera, they're just like, you know what, the only way to do this right is to 4K each eyeball.
Yeah, and they have a custom chip and stuff like that just for this stuff. Yeah.
It's an Apple product.
Yeah.
It feels like an Apple product in every conceivable way.
I also think the decision to externalize the battery is a very Apple thing where you're going to put it in your pocket. It's the size of a phone. You just slip it right in. And then it doesn't look like you're wearing a cyberpunk thing as much. It looks like it's the thing is more friendly looking than most any other device. And I think intentionally looks like ski goggles or scuba mask because that is a known thing versus, not to invoke his name, but the Oculus guy, there's some pretty infamous photos of him using his own device, and no one wants to look that way.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Actually, none of the Bloomberg reported none of the Apple executives are allowed to be seen with that thing on. So you'll never see one of them.
Yes, because they don't. That's
because they look like idiots.
That's just good comms policy. You don't want to be memed to infinity.
But it's funny that here's the thing you should wear, but we're never going to wear it.
No, you guys buy it first. $3,500.
See what happens.
Then we'll meme
Will you get beaten up?
But I will say, I'm really wondering now if I don't think there's a $5,000 US, a $10,000 version of this product that today is any better. I think this is the best kit you could have. And if we're all still sitting around and being like, when am I going to put this on my face? I think that's a really bad sign for this current trajectory of tech. And I think it might be fueled more by the wants and desires for owning the next thing rather than it being much more emergent. That might change if they just integrate ChatGPT with this thing and like Siri's actually cool and like you're basically Spider-Man 2099 at that point. I just saw the new Spider-Man movie, by the way. Spoilers. I will. I watched it in IMAX.
Real IMAX.
Real IMAX
virtual IMAX. Okay.
was there, and I was like, I'm going to watch this movie 4 times, and then I was thinking, what would it be like? Because it's a beautiful film. It's just incredibly rich and beautiful, and I wanted that experience of it. And I was thinking about how this Apple device might actually make watching it at home be as compelling because you can kind of set the ratio and the distance from the thing. And I was just like, could I create my home IMAX and just freak out? But if that's the best that we can get to with the best possible kit with Apple thoroughly thinking through the pros and cons here, I guess we just wasted 40 minutes of everyone's time going through this. Patrick O'Rourke, thank you for being on the podcast. Where can people find your works as you continue to cover the launch of this device, the Canadian potential launch, and then future iterations once developers get their hot hands on this?
You can find all my stuff on mobilesyrup.com and my extremely hot takes on Twitter at Patrick_O'Rourke.
You can't find Patrick on any other podcast, though, because he hasn't invited me on in like a decade, and it still pisses me off.
Someday. I'm just waiting for the perfect fit. We got to keep you waiting for the perfect episode.
Patrick, man. It's
the BlackBerry one. I'm going to bring you up for the BlackBerry one.
You missed your window, man. It's been great talking to you, man. We got to get you back in the studio to do this. And I'm glad that you answered all the questions and you didn't just try to check out in the corner. It's a real sign of maturity in you. I really appreciate it, man. So proud of you.
Thank you. Personal growth on my end. Thanks for having me.